Good evening, everyone. I'm Kathleen Spring, the superintendent here at Mohonasen. Welcome to our annual budget hearing, which is something that's mandated by New York State. We've been working on the budget for about 2 months now, and this is the final presentation before the budget vote on Tuesday. The format of tonight is that we'll do this piece, the budget hearing first, and then we'll do meet the candidates portion of the meeting after that. And we'd like to start off with a video that was created to kick off our budget hearing.
On Tuesday, May 16th, Mohonasen residents will go to the polls to vote on a proposed $50.9 million budget for the 2017-18 school year. The proposed budget would increase the tax levy by 2.8%, which is below the district's state-calculated tax cap of 6%. The estimated tax increase on a Rotterdam home with a value of $150,000 would be about $53. The proposed budget preserves all existing student programming and school staff and includes the addition of 13.5 full-time equivalent positions. At Mohonasen, we're focused on providing a solid education that prepares students for the future. In addition to academics, we as educators understand our responsibility to model and teach character in our schools. That's why we'll continue the district-wide effort to construct a culture of acceptance and adaptability here at Mohonasen. This year, teachers, students, and district leaders work toward that vision daily by promoting values like respect, empathy, inclusion, and understanding, and we're already seeing results from our efforts.
I really do think it starts with us right here, and I'm hoping to inspire curiosity and a lifelong love for learning. From doing group work and teaching them how to cooperate and collaborate, to never give up. I think all of that starts here and will last them for a lifetime.
I like making new friends and working with them.
Everyone here at Pinewood's really accepting and helpful.
Like when you do something kind, you inspire people to do the same thing. When somebody's left out, like a new kid, because I was a new kid once, and a friend came to me and he said he could join us.
When we get different opinions from other people, some people might have opinions on this needs to be changed, and then we can disagree and things, and then we can figure out, maybe we're right, we need to fix this.
On May 16th, residents will also elect 2 people to the Board of Education and vote on a bus purchase proposition. Polls are open from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. in the Mohonasen High School gym. Keep an eye out for signs indicating which entrance to use for the budget vote. And for more information, as always, visit the district's website at mohonasen.org.
So now I'll turn the presentation over to Mr. Chris Roberti, our Assistant Superintendent for Business.
Once we get PowerPoint to respond, we'll be just... Okay, thank you, Dr. Spring. All right, so I know that a lot of you have been here throughout the presentations, and basically what we do tonight is to try to summarize and go over all the aspects that we've talked about throughout the budget process and kind of give a big picture look at where we stand. And this is essentially going to be the budget that was adopted back on April 3rd, I believe, by the Board of Education, and that will go before the voters on May 16th. So if we take a big picture look, the first piece that we'll look at here is the total amount of the budget. The budget is almost $51 million this year, $50.94 million, and the budget increase over last year is just over 5%. One of the things we've discussed throughout this process is that that's a 5% increase in the budget, but 1.3 million of that 2.5 million is from an increase in capital costs, and those don't have any impact, believe it or not, on the instructional part of the budget. So it's one of the things that we've been talking about throughout, and I'll kind of reference a few different times as to how that actually gets paid for. So that 1.3 million is paid for in a few different ways. It's paid for as part of the capital exclusion that's on the tax levy, which is something that can only be used for capital debt. It's paid for through increase in building aid, which comes from the state, which is directly related to capital projects. And then the final piece is the money that comes from our debt service account, which again can only be used for capital expenses. So that's a decision that we made as a district when we had the new capital project that's happening, is to use some of that money to make sure that the taxpayers wouldn't be shouldering that whole burden as the project came online. So all of the ways that that 1.3 million increase is funded are through funds that can only be used toward capital debt and cannot be used for instruction. So when you look at that increase, we see a big spike this year, but that's the reason for it. And like I said, it's not taking anything away from what we do in the classroom. The tax levy increase over the current year is about $727,000. That's $727,000. The 2.8% that was referenced in the video. And that did end up being our final tax levy limit calculation. Another piece of the video that was, again, right on point, which all the numbers were, is that without some of the offsets that the Board of Education decided to put toward the budget, that tax levy would have been over 6%. So one of the things that we wanted to do is to fulfill the promise when we went out for this project, is to make sure that there wasn't a huge impact in any given year on the taxpayers. So the Board of Education allocated an extra $500,000 this year over last year to make sure that the tax levy did not go up to that 6%, which would be the initial calculation. And because we stayed within the levy limit, that's why we can get 50% of the vote. In order for the budget to pass, you need that 50% plus 1. The staffing increases that were referenced in the video, there's instructional staff. We are looking at projections, and we'll look at class sizes in a minute, but 2 net FTEs in K-6, 2 total FTEs in special education, 3 extra teacher assistants, which go to special education programs, 1 technology teacher to look at the expansion of some of our programming that we have in our new buildings, specifically mechatronics, 1 FTE in AIS math, which will be split between 2 buildings most likely, but we'll take a program review and determine where that final allocation goes. A 0.5 increase in speech services, 1.0 in librarian, and 1.0 in music, which will be used to help offset some things throughout the district. So there's also 2 non-instructional positions, 1 FTE of a cleaner and another one of a health office assistant. The cleaner is specific to the project as well, where we have put on some extra square footage at the high school and need some extra time over at the new Center for Advanced Technology. And the health office assistant is going to help meet the needs of some of our elementary students that have increased health needs. So if we look at the average class sizes and take a look at the chart of basically where we are this year, and I want to make sure to specify that this is not where we thought we would be last year at this time. And the reason that I bring that up is all of these right now are enrollment projections. So when we look back now at 16-17, we're looking at current enrollments. So when we go to do this process again next year, what we have for 17-18 may not be exactly accurate. And one of the reasons that I bring that up is if you look at class sizes, we try to keep them as consistent as possible throughout K-6. One of the things that you would notice in the 2016-17 grade 6 is that they have a class size of 25. That actually would have been much higher. We allocated after the budget process, we had shifted a position from a kindergarten section that with kindergarten enrollment being a little lower than projected, moved it to 6th grade to keep those classes down. So even though you see those at 25, an extra FTE after the budget process was allocated to 6th grade. So we do the best that we can to project enrollments, but sometimes you get an influx of students in a grade level, and kindergarten is one of the ones that's definitely the one that can fluctuate the most because they're new students to our district altogether. So we do the best job that we can to project, and then as the budget process finishes, as we go through the summer, we make final allocations. But our best determination right now would be the number of sections in the average class size that you see in those last 2 columns. And if you look down, you'll see that everybody, K-6 is between 20 and 23 students per class. So relatively smaller class sizes than what we've had in the past few years, and that's definitely been a goal of the board and the district. In grades 7 through 12, it's a little bit tougher to talk about specific class sizes. They vary by subject area, but we try to keep them in that general realm as well. So as we take a big picture look at some of our expenses for next year, the ones that we want to highlight are, the major changes. And if you see at the top, you'll see instruction, which is up over $1 million. And when we talk about instruction, that's really anything that has to do with the students during the day. That's the teachers and the guidance counselors and all the people that they work with and come in contact with. So that's obviously a piece. And if we go back to the staffing of a few pages ago, all of those extra FTEs that you see in the educational side would show up in those increases in instruction along with any contractual increases. You'll also see the increase in employee benefits. And one of the reasons that that's an interesting one to look at is it doesn't look like a huge increase in employee benefits. But one of the reasons for that is that we have a few employee benefits, specifically the retirement systems, the employees' retirement system and the teachers' retirement system, which actually have decreases in benefits. The contribution rates have gone down. So they would show up as negatives, but we've also had some significant increases, specifically in healthcare costs that have gone up. So they've netted out a little bit to create something that's not a huge increase there, but it's certainly a concern going forward that we can't expect that the retirement systems will continue to decrease over time. We've been lucky for the last few years. Transportation is actually a decrease on that, so that's certainly worth mentioning. And we had a few extra runs that we had added in last year's budget, thinking that we would need them for the kindergarten enrollment that we didn't end up needing. So we were able to pull those out of this year's budget, and that's why you see the decrease there. The other big one, and this is one that I spoke about at the beginning, is you'll see the $1.3 million increase in the debt service. And that is the piece that's due to the current capital project and a variety of other items, but majority of it is the capital project. And as I spoke about before, that is fully funded with dollars that are specifically allotted to capital costs. So we have to make sure the budget balances. So when we see the revenues, we will see similar increases, the same $2.5 million increase and ending up at that $51 million. The big pieces on this, you'll see the increase in state aid. Now, $600,000 of that $940,000 is an increase in building aid. Again, goes straight back to those capital costs. The property tax levy, a little over $500,000 of that is what I would call kind of real money increases that the district would have based on the growth factors that are part of that formula. And the other $200,000 is part of the capital exclusion that would go toward the project. And then the three that I really want to point out are there are certain decisions that the board makes every year in trying to balance a budget and balancing kind of program and student needs with being fiscally responsible. And there's three of them on there that are increases that are directly related to board decisions. And that's, you'll see the increase in fund balance appropriation of $75,000, an increase of reserves in $250,000, and then the increase that I talked about a little bit before was the interfund transfer of $500,000. And so together, that's $825,000 of extra money that's coming out of reserves or the debt service account or from fund balance that the board had decided to allocate. And it's not a long-term thing that we can do, but when looking at programs and looking at the needs of the school, the idea was to keep moving forward with all the initiatives that we've had and hope that eventually the state starts to make us whole on some of the things that we have with foundation aid and things. So, the board has to make those kind of tough decisions, and, allocating that money at least keeps programs intact and moving in the right direction in the short term with the hope that in the long term that we get some relief from the state. So I just think it's important to mention those things, and, it's a couple of things. It's keeping the class sizes where we talked about, and then it's also the fact that the $500,000 keeps that tax levy down, and that was the opportunity where it would have been over 6% to the taxpayers, but it keeps it down at under 3% by allocating those extra funds. So I just think those are important things to mention. Another thing that we talk about this time of year is kind of breaking the budget down into the three-part budget, which is program, capital, and administration. And they're basically what you think they would be. Program is most of the instructional budget and benefits that go along with that. The capital costs are not only the capital expenses that we have to pay for like buildings and things like that, but it's also the operation and maintenance of buildings. And administration has to do with a variety of things, not just the administration in the district, but a lot of the general support that is not directly related to the classroom throughout the district, including a bunch of BOCES services and things like that. So you can see the total amounts in each one of those and then the total percentages. And those remain relatively consistent from year to year. And in the budget newsletter that we put out, we have comparisons from one year to the next and to see how those look year to year. One of the things that we want to mention with that piece too is when we talk about contingent budget later is that the administrative component of the budget in a contingent budget has to stay at least as low as the prior year when you go to a contingent budget. So it does impact when people's budgets are voted down and you have to go to a 0% increase from the tax levy. One of the things that the three-part budget does is it makes sure that you're pulling money from the right places and as much as possible not taking it away from programs and kids. Now, if we think back to what our tax levy was, that's $727,000. If that got pulled out of the budget, if we ever had to go to a contingent budget, it would have a massive impact, obviously, on students and on our programs. But some of the rules that are in place with the three-part budget try to mitigate that as much as possible. And looking at the tax levy, and we've been through this formula in some detail over time, basically what they do is the state takes two different growth factors, one local to our district only and another one that's statewide. And then you factor in any of the exclusions that are permissible under the law. And for us, that exclusion is the capital exclusion. And so when we take all of those and put them together into that final calculation, that's where that 2.8%, the 2.83 overall that was talked about in the video comes from. And when we look at the actual impact, which is what really matters to us, is kind of that impact that it's going to have on taxpayers, the pretty good estimate, and what we do is from year to year, we try to make an estimate, then we go back and see, okay, how close were we, and try to adjust it with other factors. A pretty good estimate of a homeowner that has a $150,000 full value home would be about a $53 increase in their taxes with that 2.83%. And the reason for that is part of the process of coming up with that tax levy number is that we have a small amount of growth within the community. And because of that, it also disperses the tax levy among more people. So even though the actual calculation is 2.83, the impact on an individual taxpayer would be closer to 2%, and that's what keeps that levy down a little bit for the individual, closer to that $53. The other thing that will be on the ballot would be the proposed bus purchase request. So that'll be the proposition that's on the ballot. This year we have 4 buses up there. We have our first 72 passenger bus that we're looking to purchase, which is basically 1 extra row of seats. It's 6 extra seats if they're smaller children and 4 if they're adult size. 2 regular 66 passenger buses, and then 1 smaller bus that's equipped with a wheelchair lift. The total of that proposition is $420,000. And as you can see, we have an aid ratio right now of about 68% for transportation aid. And so that brings the local share of that down to about $130,000, which we would pay over the course of 5 years. And essentially what happens is we always have bus debt coming off and bus debt coming on. They generally net out. The estimate in this case is when the 18-19 budget comes in, it'll be about a $10,000 increase in the cost of our buses. So that's the impact, and it doesn't hit until the 2018-19 budget. Lastly, we're about to meet the candidate tonight, and we have 2 seats up for election on May 17th. Running for these seats are Lisa Gagliotti and Stacy McTurk, and that's the order that they will appear on the ballot. The term is a 3-year term that starts July 1st, 2017. And information will be mailed out about the candidates, and there's also a bunch of information online. So since this is a public hearing, I would certainly open it up and see if anybody has any questions before I talk about the contingent budget again just a little bit. Oh, yeah, sorry. No, I'll get to that. Okay, seeing no questions. Just briefly about the contingent budget rules one more time. Basically what happens to go to a contingent budget is that if a budget is voted down, then the district has the choice to either go to a contingent budget immediately, which some districts do choose to do, or they have a choice to put up the same budget again or modify it slightly and put it up again to voters. And then if it's voted down again, they're mandated to go to a contingent budget. And when that happens, that's when they wouldn't be able to raise any more money via the tax levy. So for us, it's that $727,000 that we would miss out on if we ever had to go to a contingent budget, which, not to belabor a point, but that's why it's so important and why the board feels so strongly that we don't want to go over that tax cap, look for a supermajority, and have to put that burden onto the taxpayers. So just lastly, the actual budget vote itself is May 16th, and it'll still be in our high school gym, as it has been in the past, from 7 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. And the voter eligibility information for both in person and for the absentee ballots is up on the screen. And you can also find more information on our website. All right, any questions? Okay, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Spring. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to transition to the Meet the Candidate portion of tonight.